Hello guys, this is Sam Presto from Sam Presto Films, and today we're going to be discussing about frame rates. 24 frames, 25 frames, 30 frames, 60 frames, 120 frames. So without wasting your time, let's get started. 24 frames per second, 25 frames per second, 30 frames per second, and 60 frames per second. So what came about all this? Okay, back in the days, the film industry, they were shooting motion pictures without sound, and they were shooting at 14 frames per second. So when they decided to introduce sound, so the only way the lips can sync with the pictures is if they add more frames, and they were able to achieve it at 24 frames per second. So that was the time the sound can sync with the lips. Okay, so since then the standard has always been 24 frames per second, and again it's cheaper. If they are doing CGI, it's cheaper dealing on 24 frames per second than dealing on 30 frames per second or 60 frames per second. So because you have to work on 60 frames or 30 frames instead of working on 24 frames. So since then, 24 frames per second has been the standard of filmmaking. So now, talking about 25 frames, 30 frames. So for filmmaking, 24 frames is the standard. For broadcast, 30 frames and 25 frames is the standard. Now, why do we have 25 frames and 30 frames for broadcast and 24 frames for filmmaking? Now, the AC systems in America and Europe has different frequency. For America, 60 Hz is the frequency. For Europe, 50 Hz is the frequency. So in America, they decide to come up with the standard of 30 frames per second for the TVs to broadcast, which is the NTSC, 30 frames per second. So the meaning of NTSC, National Television System Committee, so they decided to come up with the 30 frames per second, meaning when you broadcast in America 30 frames per second, it doesn't flicker. But if you broadcast 25 frames per second in America, it flickers. So the Europe 30 frames per second flickers in the Europe. So, but they decide to come up with the phase alternating lines, which is the power of 25 frames per second, and it stops flickering. So because of the frequency, that's where the creation of the 30 frames and the 25 frames per second. So, but with the technology these days, with the projectors and the processors and the softwares, you can actually shoot and interpret on another frame. I can shoot 25 frames and interpret it on 30 frames, or I can shoot 30 frames and interpret it on 25 frames. But for filmmaking, the standard is 24 frames because of the film procedures for the strips and for the projectors of film. The film projector is different from your regular projector, so the standard has always been 24 frames per second. So for filmmaking, since the standard has always been 24 frames per second, and for broadcast, the standard has always been 30 and 25 frames. So for individual filmmakers like us, telling stories, software has made it easy. So we can always shoot and interpret it with our softwares. So you don't have to worry what you're shooting on. Just bring it to the software and interpret it. But it's always good to shoot at the same frame rate per second if you're a professional and you know what you're doing. But if you want to learn how to interpret frame rates, click on the link below. I have a tutorial that can show you how to do that. So now, as a filmmaker, telling your story, shooting your documentary, your music videos, depending on where your output is heading to, that's what will determine what you want to shoot. If you're shooting a movie, a proper movie that is going to the cinemas and has to use cinematic projectors, then you have to do 24 frames per second. But if you're telling your stories, shooting your stories, your regular for broadcast, depending on where you are, if you're in the US, you do 30 frames. If you're in Europe or Africa, you do 25 frames per second. Okay, jumping into the 60 frames per second and the 120 frames per second. 120 or 60 frame or 75 frame, the higher frame rates, they were introduced to help your creative filming, your creative storytelling. You can decide to choose 60 frames per second depending on how creative you are, or 120 frames per second if your camera permits you to do it, because most cameras has a limitation of 60 frames on 4K, while some like the Red can shoot 120 on 4K. So depending on the machine you're using will determine the higher frame rates you will achieve. So, and those higher frame rates is just for you to tell your stories in a slow motion way, in some fast, some sport events, some wildlife events. You can decide to slow it down to make your audience enjoy what they are saying. So those are not really standard. Those are for creative minds to use and exploit and give some creative footages or creative output out there. So I hope you understand what I've been trying to explain about the frame rates. So for more in-depth tutorial, I'm going to be talking about time interpolation very soon. I have a tutorial I've done about interpreting it. But for more in-depth tutorial, click on the subscribe button. For more in-depth tutorial, if you've not subscribed, and also hit like if you enjoy it. If you don't, too, hit like. And thank you for watching. This is Presto from Presto Films, signing out.